This one's really hard for me to do. Anyway, so fraud. When a person makes an intentionally or reckless misrepresentation or opinion to trick someone into a deal or agreement. The person's goal basically is to get another person or people to act or not act based on that, misrepresentation. Often fraud is proven when the following 6 factors take place. So, number one would be a false claim is made. Number two, the person knew making the claim that it is or was, false, or they made it recklessly without knowing its truth. Number three would be person A relied on person B, right, to lean on the false information. And number four would be harm, the result of the misrepresentation, you know, harming someone, something, usually people though. So, for example, my point is if a car dealer says a car gets 30 miles per gallon, but it actually only gets 25, the plaintiff would need to provide evidence of the car's actual fuel efficiency. Okay? In court, if proven, the plaintiff can claim remedies such as like recession and or damages, for example, in contract law, the plaintiff would cancel the contract. So now I will give you 2 case examples of this playing out. Okay, so stay tuned. Because remember, God is all about love, truth, and justice. Oh, my hair doesn't keep coming in my face. But so, case number 1, the tragic story of Dylan Groves, who was born drug addicted, both of his parents. They had a 20-year marriage and already a 14-year-old son. The Groves, Jessica and Dylan, when they appeared at the hospital because Jessica was ready to give birth again, she refused all questions the hospital kept asking her, even pertinent information like, how far along are you? Who is your doctor? How about what is your last name? But Jessica would only keep saying, it's coming, it, being the baby she was carrying. She refused to give a urine sample when asked by the nurse because she was high, as they expected, even when they told her, it is paramount for the baby that we know what substances you are on to further help you and prepare even for labor. Meanwhile, Daniel was nearby, who could have been helpful in answering some basic questions about himself and his wife, Jessica, and this baby about to be born. But unfortunately, he chose to also be uncooperative because he did blurt out that his wife did heroin 2 days prior and kept missing her appointments to go see the doctor. But in fear of partner's reaction and getting into trouble, right, he stays back and stops talking. Jessica in labor, though, doesn't appear to be in pain, even to the point of pushing the baby out. The hospital would not give her any pain medication because they didn't know what she already, had taken or when. So the baby Dylan was born and it was determined to be a month early, weighing only 5 pounds and given oxygen to help him breathe while he was being evaluated in the NICU. So they presented him with what's called a Finnegan test, which is what the hospital administers to help them see how bad the withdrawal symptoms are. This study measures things like tremors, shakes, irritability, sweating. Also, a urinalysis is done on all new babies when they're born. It came back unconfirmed for amphetamine. Um, Note here. Oh, that's right. Because I think it's important to say 10 babies in the NICU are born addicted to any given time. There's at least, 10 there being treated. So, but in response to her unclear test results, they then sent out his umbilical cord for further testing. So, the test would show every substance she had used since 20 weeks pregnant. The umbilical cord tested positive for not only, get this, methamphetamines, but also for morphine and fentanyl, too. When given opportunity to see her newborn baby, Jessica showed no interest. She remains cold and is surprised, the hospital was because she showed no concern to hold him, to see how he was doing, ask questions. The hospital did not plan well, though, because they were not going to release the baby to Jessica, but they were willing to release the baby, you know Dylan, to Daniel Sr., the baby's father. Now stay tuned, because there's some relevant information here. Because the agreement was if he could pass a urine drug test. Only if he passed the drug test, and he agreed that Jessica could not live in the home, that Jessica, I'm sorry, the same home that she lived in, for several years. I mean, married for 20, right? And their 14-year-old son lived there as well in the trailer. So the hospital was aware of it being unlikely a plan, that either one of the Groves would adhere to. So DCSF placed him in a foster home initially with Angela Bowling, a teacher who had already raised her kids and experienced with the foster care system. And even when she got the phone call on a Friday afternoon saying, can you take this newborn, um, the very same day. The school was very accommodating that she worked for because they gave her the time off, she suddenly needed to care for this special baby. And what do you know? All her coworkers and friends, came rushing in as well with diapers and clothes, a crib, even, virtually everything she needed for the new baby. So the foster mother also took a quick class that offered, help for her to understand and deal with withdrawal symptoms that new babies will have. So, she didn't mind, the constant rocking then and holding needed by Dylan, especially when he broke out in sweats, shaking uncontrollably all the time, she said. She would rock him and hold him all day. She supervised, even then, next, a visit from the parents who were allowed to come and see their baby. She reported back to child welfare that the mother definitely appeared high on something. So, as she continued to let the parents visit their baby anyway, she went in agreement, though, that was made by the state of Ohio, is the state. Reports, including the decision, was made in the courts that both the baby and the 14-year-old newborn and the 14-year-old son, were in the custody of the courts to be supervised, basically. They decided to start the plan of family reunification. It was stated that Jessica was, remember, not to live in the home, but was continued allowed supervised visits, to her sons. In addition, Jessica needed to complete a drug program. and provide drug screen testing. But since Daniel tested negative, hold that thought, for drugs, it was decided when baby Dylan was just 2 weeks old to be placed with his father. The foster mom put all her concerns out there, how she thought the parents weren't ready when they came to pick him up, and how she stated, they needed more time even to get themselves together, etc. That no one had actually observed the urine drug screen given to Daniel either. So I will let you draw your own conclusions there, but keep this in mind for later in the story because it does become relevant. So the defeated foster mom, hands over the baby and even diapers and supplies, saying, to please call if there's anything needed. Yet she called child welfare again, this time even saying that she thought the father looked high. So ultimately, it was decided by DCFS, to offer the parents to enroll. The program they have is called Help Me Grow. Yet they conveniently made themselves unavailable anytime they were sought out. So the caseworker got excuses, to start, but was able to get an in home visit, though, just noting he was quiet and no injuries, that Jessica was holding him, and the caseworker reminded the parents of the drug rehab that Jessica was supposed to attend. So DCFS chased some more calls. Then a second in home visit was conducted, and the worker reported quite the same, that that she appeared to have no concerns and that the baby looked, great. And however, the worker did not, though, weigh the baby. She didn't hold the baby. She didn't check under the baby's clothing to fully assess him. This is actually a requirement because the DCFS had legal guardianship, over baby Dylan. It was said that Jessica only comes over during the day to bond with him. Oh, and I can just add in here, that Jessica, the mother, was previously an LPN. Those of you that don't know, that is a licensed practical nurse. So, she took the oath of do no harm to the public. But hell, we're just asking her at this time for it to just stand in the home. I am not trying to be, judgmental here, but I provide facts because it's the truth, right? Like promise that we are all seeking here. Also, when she could bond with Dylan in the agreement that they had made was supposed to be outside of the home unless supervised by DCFS. So within a month, the Groves were already in violation. Um, in reality, though, Jessica wasn't just visiting during the day, she was living there full time. They also began dodging social services. The next visit was canceled, because Daniel called DCFS to say he was out of town, visiting his ailing, dying father in the hospital, that he was sick or something, and needed to reschedule. As did the next visit, that week got canceled too. So DCFS said they couldn't certify that the kids weren't harmed or injured because she had not seen them, being the worker of the case. So custody remained with DCFS. However, he was allowed to physically stay in the home, the baby, and actually both kids, really, right? With the father, they're thinking. But when they continued their pattern of dodging social services and Jessica being found to have never began rehab or attend any of the services they offered, they were found to be in violation. So the caseworker thought of one last ditch effort, to reach out to their 14-year-old son at his school. When the worker asked him about his ailing grandfather, he said, who is that? Well, then the worker removed him from his school and placed him in physical custody of DCFS. That afternoon, the father, at least, Daniel, was very angry. His son didn't get off the school bus and was told by the school when he called that Daniel Jr. was picked up and left with Child Protective Services. He then shot the worker an angry text saying, my son has nothing to do with this and you're going to put him through hell. He was then advised that baby Dylan and all his personal items were to be brought to the Social Services Department immediately, and Daniel agreed to do that the following day. However, he did not follow through with that either. So, after a few more days of calls not answered, the worker filed a missing persons report for the baby. There were several times they tried to come to the door, and even the sheriff's department, seeing the persons or vehicles were there, but just not answering the door. It got to the point where the SWAT team was armed with arrest warrants, and officers over a loudspeaker were yelling for them to come out with their hands up. Jessica appeared only wearing a t-shirt and underwear at the front door, saying that CFS had already come to pick up Dylan, and they needed to leave her alone. He shouldn't have the baby for months or weeks. Sorry. This was obviously an outright lie because DCFS was the ones, who called the police. They were contacted, and they didn't have further incident with Jessica. However, Daniel caused a 6-hour standoff until he was finally surrendered. Then at first, no one was talking, but they, being smart as they come, those cops, put them in a room together and just kind of like left casually, the interrogation room anyway. And those of you that watch crime stories know that they heavily bug those, rooms to record even a whisper with highly sensitive, microphones. Well, apparently Daniel and Jessica, though, don't watch crime TV or are just stupid because they let everything out. The one that stuck me was when they said if they find his body and if they find out where he had a broken arm and shit, we're flocked. It didn't matter, they're saying, but we are just going to keep saying we don't acknowledge, where he's at. But they since, let the cat out of the bag. And it was all out on tape. So they took them out of there and returned Jessica, but were focused on Daniel to get him to talk, saying it was only fair to give your newborn son a proper burial. Dylan's makeshift grave was found at the bottom of a 30-foot well. The detectives enlisted firefighters to finally recover him, but oddly enough, the firefighters weren't informed initially of what they were looking for from the well, but what was retrieved was 2 milk crates. They were chained together and padlocked. At first, they were excited, but as soon as the water drained and the smell of decomposition hit them, they knew exactly what they were recovering, and the mood changed entirely. The medical examiner was given the task of sitting and sifting through and disassembling what was found. Once the 8 metal wires, rope, chains, 3 padlocks, 12 zip ties were removed from the 2 milk cartons, it came apart, revealing baby Dylan, his remains. He had been wrapped in multiple layers of plastic then, too, and had been weighed down with a makeshift anchor made out of iron and 18 large rocks. Dylan's remains were examined by the doctor, who noted the following inflicted injuries: 2 skull fractures that did not occur even at the same time, 2 bruises on the right side of his chest and left leg, a laceration on his left arm, too, fractures of the left humerus, radius, and ulna, and old healing fractures on ribs 6 and 7. These also did not occur at the same time. So, Dr. Brown testified that Dylan's cause of death was homicidal violence of undetermined etiology, could not be determined due to the state, basically, of his body. Dylan weighed 4 pounds 8 ounces when he was discovered. The doctor believed that the fractures showed at least 3 different traumas. The toxicology report determined methamphetamines and amphetamines were in baby Dylan's liver. During the trial, a lot of failings came to light, to say the least. The CPS supervisor admitted that she did not release an Amber Alert because, quote, listen to this one, it would give a bad reputation for the agency because we lost a child, end quote. She has since, stepped down from that job of hers. Their teenager that had to testify against his parents told them that their mom admitted to being pregnant to him when she started to see her stomach, or when he did, her stomach started sticking out. And when he asked why his baby brother had bruises on his face and swelling head, he was told it was because a dream catcher had fell, hitting him, and got stuck on his arm accidentally, allegedly. The prosecutor didn't buy this story because the unsurmountable amount of injuries were much more than a dream catcher could ever do. He also testified to the fact that every couple of days he provided his urine for his father, both before and after Dylan's birth. Seeing that Daniel Sr. was all ready on probation for a misdemeanor, a theft charge at a Kroger's grocery store, and was subjected even to random drug screens, even before DCFS had gotten involved. Now, remember, the tests he had passed previously um, in order to bring Dylan back home, right? This was only possible because he coerced his son to help him pass those tests. When Jessica got on the stand, I will tell you, I felt the fury. She even got a smart mouth. When the female prosecutor, probably a mother herself, and what was only asking what we all were thinking, right? She began yelling at her, to answer for her crime. And at first she was fake crying, but only for herself. When asked to explain, injuries on this helpless newborn, she stated first like it was an accident, and then it was, oh, I dropped him, or it was, I don't remember. But then when asked, where did you get all the tools to build a cage to put your newborn baby in on the way to his grave, she said, well, I ain't gonna find any laying out here in the yard, and I sure didn't get it out from underneath the kitchen sink. Spoiler alert, she will never be moved from segregation. It is very rare to see a case out in court, like this, similar, to a soap opera, right? The whole world watching now, though we know why. So, quick note too, I try to feel out every side of a situation. And even when I agree or don't agree, I do try to put myself in that person's shoes. But the way she was entitled and victimized herself was just, I can't. The husband testified he saw her hitting him a few times when he was crying. Remember, a newborn baby. Something about, blaming the system, and the director of the state case is to blame, what that mother did to that baby, let alone the father. I have lived, to receive and know the emotional and any parent, can do to a child. That is hard enough. And yes, even the physical. But this precious baby, just weeks old, I repeat, weeks old, had a fractured skull, okay? broken arms and legs, ribs too. What about the 14-year-old child, that was in the home witnessing his mom abusing his little baby brother? Then he had to testify in person in front of his parents how many times his dad made him help pass a drug test before they were sent to prison. So, I want to hear your opinion on this one. What do you think about this case? Because the system severely failed this, newborn baby. He was succumbed to the most brutal abuse at the hands of his own mother. It's a life I would say, is a life sentence, long enough? What do you think about CPS? Should the state of Ohio, in this case, be held liable and financially too, right? So, think about the rest of the family. This 14-year-old, what he has to live with. Maybe, change his name even. I mean, it's not my decision, but how much he actually witnessed, as a kid. Forgive me, I have a little bit of a cough. And he is going to need a whole lot of therapy, is my point, to recover from the reality of his biological parents, right? Other parents are going to have to step in because they're locked up for life for murdering his little baby brother. So, this would be one case I finally, though, understand the purpose of death penalty. I kept having to stop and, look up to Father God and, going, I can't. This is too overwhelming. He calms me down, though, and says, you see, it's like that. I told you before, that you can't save everyone. So now I get what he was telling me all along, too, leading up to this. And I usually just accept facts and whatever punishment is given on a case with no opinion. But the mere fact that she told her husband, do not call 911 because they are going to take me to jail and we are going to lose our other son, shows me right there that she had the cognitive ability right there to see cause and effect. She knew if he called the police, they were going to be arrested, and they, know cause and effect. Period. So don't try and come with a defense. I don't care what substance, that they were on, that she didn't know what she was doing, and the same goes for him. He knew what he was asking, doing. They knew each other real well, right? 20 years, even. This is also the first case, by the way, that I was witnessing, in person. And just like Bonnie and Clyde, right? They were side by side, too, literally, when they were given the consecutive life sentences for felony child abuse and aggravated murder of a newborn baby. So, this is where I ask, why not capital punishment? Now, second on a cough drop, so I can do this. We are going to flip, though, to the other side of reality with case number 2. Okay? So, forgive me. I'm going to try to, 27 years ago this month, Brenda, Brian, and Brandon, they were 6 and 8 years old. Under intense questioning by police and social welfare workers. The boys claimed to have not only been molested by their parents, but also, I don't know why it's hard for me to pronounce this, ritually abused in a satanic cult. The youngsters said they had been hung from the ceiling, even by hooks, forced to engage in sex acts, and photographed for child pornography. The Kniffins were only 2 of more than 3 dozen defendants, many of them parents, of the alleged victims in Bakersfield, California, who were accused of subjecting children to horrible um, horrors, like elaborate molestation and satanic ritual abusing. This is back in the 1980s, early 90s. The accusations were shocking, outrageous even, and years later to be proven untrue entirely. After serving 12 years of 240-year sentences, the Kniffens were exonerated and released from prison. Now, many of the other adults convicted in the Bakersfield abuse cases also were freed after these convictions were appealed and overturned. The Bakersfield molestation cases were tainted by coercive interrogation of impressionable, young children, and flagrant, I'd say, misconduct, including the, suppression of qualifying evidence. The Kniffen's story, and that of, half a dozen others in Bakersfield, convicted of abusing their own children before their eventual, exonerations, of course, is told in, an unblinking, heart wrenching, detailed documentary film called Witch Hunt. You can look that up yourself. Um, the Kniffens themselves, though, also go on to have their very own movie, and it's called Just Ask My Children. That's a good movie on Lifetime, too. So, what we come to find out is there are all too many examples of the way in which public opinion is swayed by tainted evidence and emotional, even irrational decision making. The public, hysteria that surrounded this case is every bit as essential to discuss as the public's, corruption. I mean, look at me, I'm getting sick just trying to talk about this case. This one too is hard. So these lightning rod crimes, they're horrific, but tend to challenge our law of assumption, right? Or lawful. But what about the innocence until proven guilty, right? When does that come into play? The devastation that occurs too, during those interrogations and trials continues. It can, it's heroic efforts of the victims. By that, I mean the convicted. So, to rebuild lives, that was shattered for the personal and political gain of what? The district attorney and the sheriff's department in that town? As if often the case with, wrongfully accused and exonerated folks, many of the Bakersfield, parents harbor, though, little bitterness toward those who helped put them in prison, including their own children, now grown, men and women who remain, unfortunately, the victims of a justice system run amok, right? So, I cannot fathom the guilt I would bear by lying, even as an innocent child, coerced, by adults into confessing to things that simply, didn't happen. I had caused, my parents hardship. I'm thinking, all of these stories, witch hunt, are it's heart wrenching, right? So, but it is the Kniffens, though, who faces and stories, with me most are touching when they were arrested and sentenced to unthinkable long prison terms. They were a simple, working class young couple, right? They were in love too. They loved their children as well. The accusations are mind boggling, and they had faith, though, that they would be cleared of the horrendous charges. But they weren't. Their kids were to live in a foster home, or they went to, and they were sent to separate prisons. But the Kniffens hold on to faith and to the love, they had even for each other daily. Love letters they would send each other in prison, spiritual letters, letters full of hope and blind faith. That, faith paid off, right? The Kniffens are free now. They're reunited even with their children and each other and still married. They later sued, though, the county and settled for about, I think it was 275,000. Back then in the early 90s, that's a lot of money. But the state where I reside is all too familiar, with cases of the wrongly convicted. Since 1977, the state here has seen more than 75 wrongful convictions, including 19 exonerations from death row, according, to the Center of Wrongful Convictions. But witch hunt, begins, though, with a dedication in white on a plain black screen, right? There are more than 2 million people serving time in U.S. prisons today. The movie is even dedicated, though, to the thousands of them that are actually innocent. The U.S. justice system is arguably the best in the world, right? But it is not perfect. On Good Friday, many Christians remember the trial, torture, and execution of Jesus Christ, a wrongfully accused and convicted innocent man. May we take a moment to consider the spiritual implications of the failures of our justice system. Witch hunt is a cautionary tale. Fear makes people do crazy things, and hysteria can be deadly. If it could happen in Bakersfield, it could happen anywhere, right? But the point is it's essential that we not be too prone to respond in packs or herds, like sheep. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, spoke of prison when he described, God's final judgment on humanity. It's the passage where he talks about, the least of these. When he, fed and the poor, helped the sick, clothe the naked, he says we are doing that for him, right? I was in prison, Jesus says, and you visited me. So may this documentary, of a modern experience with truth and, momentality and injustice give us pause while we recall the frightening power of a witch hunt in, crowd that cries, give us Barabbas. Jesus was a prisoner, so was St. Peter and St. Paul. Clearly, though, God holds a special concern, though, for those in trouble with the law, whether they are innocent or, guilty. That's all for today. Leave your comments below. See you guys soon, okay? Bye.